Welcome back to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Elise DeRita. Today's guest is Joe Sullivan from Pepper Hamilton. Joe spoke to us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he is based. We had such a deep and wide-ranging conversation, we have broken it up into 2 episodes. In part 1, we discussed Joe's career, pro bono and access to justice culture in Philadelphia, mandatory pro bono, and more. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Joe. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we're going to jump right in. Could you tell us what your early years are like and about your background?
I grew up on Long Island in New York, Nassau County. I grew up in a traditional Irish Catholic family. I'm one of 8. And I had a great childhood. I mean, I actually was one of those people who actually enjoyed school for the most part. Went to a great school. Then at the suggestion of other people, I applied to go to high school in New York City at a Jesuit high school that was an all-scholarship school. So I took an exam and was lucky enough to get in and spent my years from 9th through 12th grade in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. And that was a fabulous experience for all kinds of reasons, including the exposure to a group of students from a wide background, many different areas in a wide geographic area, and a very challenging curriculum that I really enjoyed.
Great. So then when and how did you decide to become a lawyer?
Well, the idea first came to me when I was in high school because one of the activities that I did at this high school was speech and debate club, basically. And I met a guy who wound up being my partner in the debating part of that, which was the biggest part for us. And we were in tournaments all around, not only in Manhattan, but all around the 5 boroughs and in parts of Westchester, New Jersey, Long Island, and we were very lucky. We won a lot of these debates, which were usually about issues of public importance. And I realized that I liked both public speaking and also just sort of outlining my views on different issues and responding to views that often were different. So that give and take was something that I really enjoyed. And that made me start thinking about what kind of career I might have that would allow me to do that, and that's how I came to start thinking about law school. I will say that while I was in college and thinking about this, I was getting a little reluctant because I thought it would be that being a lawyer might be just like speech and debate club. But as I got a little older and as I went into the workplace and met all kinds of interesting folks, I realized that law was probably the best career for me. I worked in the newspaper business in New York in between college and law school. I worked at the New York Daily News, which was a fantastic job. I worked as an assistant to the city editor in the newsroom, met all kinds of people, got to do some freelance writing on my own and enjoyed it. But after a year and a half, I realized that I wasn't a born in the wool or dyed in the wool journalist, and that it wasn't going to be something that I would find satisfying over the long term. So that's when I decided finally to make the break. I resigned from my full-time job. I went to Columbia Law School full-time, and that's where I went from there.
So once you decided to become a lawyer, what in your background or personality sparked the passion for pro bono and access to justice? Well,
I think it's something that many lawyers have, but I felt it pretty intensely, which is a sense that this is a country where there's a lot of opportunity to thrive and succeed, but that it is not shared by all, that we have too many poor people, we have too many homeless people, too many people from broken families, with the result that they don't get a good education, when they don't get the sort of emotional support the kids need when they're growing up. And so we have an adult society that is, divided between people who have been lucky and had privileges and support like I did and have, and many other people who don't. And so I think that sort of I call it the Catholic social mission because I was raised Catholic, but I think it's common to people of all faiths and people who don't have any faith, which is we all desire to see that our colleagues, our neighbors, our friends, our society is as just and supportive of the least of our fellow citizens and residents as it is to those of us who just were very lucky and got a lot of support in our earlier years. So it was that sense of disparity between people who've had great support over the years like I have and the people who, for any number of different reasons, were not lucky enough to get that support as they were growing up, and who deserve that support as much as everybody else. So it was that sense of wanting to level the playing field, give more opportunity to all the people in our society, and the realization that as a lawyer, you have special abilities to help promote that striving for equality that are not available to all of us. So that's what I wanted to. That's why I became a lawyer, and that's what I wanted to do as a lawyer.
That is a great mission and reason. So we just left off that you went to Columbia Law School. Mm-hmm. So how'd you get from there to Pepper Hamilton? Can you tell us about your career path?
Oh, sure. After I went to this high school in Manhattan, I went to Columbia College as an undergraduate. I took some time off to work at the Daily News and in other jobs just to get some experiences. Then I went back to the college and finished, and then I went to the law school. And after at Columbia Law School, I was lucky to become the editor-in-chief of something called the Columbia Human Rights Law Review, and that exposed me to yet more debate, discussion, research, and even collaboration on issues of access to justice. When I was graduating, I realized that a great opportunity might be to clerk for a federal judge, so I applied for and took a position, a 2-year position, they're always temporary, with a federal judge out in Detroit. I wanted to live in a different kind of environment than I grew up in, and Detroit is very much a Midwestern city, whereas Philadelphia and New York are East Coast cities, and they have different cultures. So I did that for 2 years, had a great experience, learned a lot. And after that, I was ready to go to a law firm because I knew that I needed to learn the skills that an effective advocate needs to acquire in order to advance the position of his or her clients and to try to level a playing field in the process.
Great. So generally speaking, because you just talked about East Coast cultures, what's the pro bono and access to justice culture like in Philadelphia? What are the most pressing legal needs, and have they changed over time?
I think that Philadelphia is a tremendous place to practice law, whether you are in a public interest lawyer, a lawyer in a private firm like I am who does significant pro bono, or whether you work in the district attorney's office or the federal defender's office, or in any number of capacities, because it's sort of like, feels sometimes like it's a laboratory city. There are so many different issues out there, so many different kinds of people, and so many opportunities to get involved, to learn skills, and try to make a difference. For example, in Philadelphia, which is a city of somewhere about 1.5 million people, therefore much smaller in terms of population than New York, is nonetheless a city with a very progressive legal community. We have 35 or more public interest law centers, sometimes called legal services agencies, and they focus on a wide range of legal issues. We have, for example, Community Legal Services is our largest public interest law center with a significant staff of full-time lawyers. There's a couple of other agencies like that, but there are also many agencies that have a much smaller number or lower number of employed lawyers, so they rely on lawyers in private firms to support their work pro bono. And so I've been involved in building the pro bono, I would say the pro bono ethic in Philadelphia through the most practical efforts we can develop so that we have a larger number of people who can represent people who cannot afford to hire their own attorneys. I've also been very active and lucky to be active in the Philadelphia Bar Association, where I co-chair and have co-chaired a committee called the Delivery of Legal Services Committee, for many years now, and that's our committee that's really composed primarily of the executive directors of all our public interest law centers, and I'm sort of there as a referee, if you will. But we all work collaboratively. There's an incredible amount of collaboration. So the members of this committee, which we call DLSC for short, we meet once a month on the first Wednesday of the month for an hour and a half, beginning at 8:30, and we basically talk about all the issues that are of importance to us, and they can range from new programs that need to be developed to respond to changes in the law or to new social crises that have arisen over time. We talk about funding issues. We talk about how to manage an agency and what kinds of management techniques are effective and which aren't, and all the other kinds of things that any nonprofit agency needs to learn how to do and to do well. But what makes DLSC a major success is, in my opinion, is that it's so collaborative. So in addition to the 30 or so executive directors of our public interest law centers, we have some representatives from all of the area law schools, including representatives from the clinical programs at the law schools, where law students have the right under certain student practice rules to engage in pro bono work and to work directly with our public interest law centers. We also have a couple of judges who attend our meetings fairly regularly, and other people who are engaged in the larger community, so that we have pretty broad-based but sometimes very intensive conversations about what's going on these days. A couple of the issues that we have been talking a lot about in recent months, and maybe even longer than that, are one is the crisis that develops in our landlord-tenant court when low-income tenants can't hire a lawyer to represent them. And that's been a long-time crisis in the courts, the landlord-tenant courts in Philadelphia and many other big cities as well, because there are so many low-income tenants who can't afford lawyers. So the Bar Association, at our urging, commissioned a study that was just released a month ago by an expert analysis, public interest analysis firm based in New York, Stout Resius, that compared what it would cost for the city of Philadelphia to hire lawyers to represent all the many, many unrepresented tenants in terms of what benefit that might yield to the city in terms of other expenses that could be saved by helping people to stay in their homes and not be evicted or otherwise disruptively displaced from their residences. And so the study was conducted well over a year, but we worked very closely with this firm, and ultimately it led to something that we're just calling the Stout Report, because that's the first name of the consulting agency that did the work. So the Stout Report, which we released about a month ago, concluded that, for example, in a given year, we could represent up to 4,400 individuals and families who are in landlord-tenant court facing eviction, but who can't afford lawyers, and that if we had proper representation for all of those people, by the way, 4,400 cases actually affects about 14,000 people, because we're only counting whoever's on the lease, the family, not all the family members, including the children. But for an investment that would help us provide representation for 4,400 in 4,400 cases affecting 14,000 people, the city would need to spend $3.5 million to hire lawyers to represent those folks. And in return, the benefits to the city would add up to $45.2 million in a wide range of expenses that could be avoided when people don't get evicted and become homeless, as many of them do if they are evicted. So those savings include such things as reducing the city's cost for providing shelter and homeless services to people who have been evicted and become homeless, services saved by the school district when families are evicted. Children often lose their place in their local school, have to be sent to another school. That takes time. The children start to have their learning curve disrupted. Sometimes they will need to be assigned to a school and get special education services or other services that are very expensive. Other social services the city would not have to provide, savings in reduced number of emergency room visits, because what happens is when people are suddenly evicted many times, they develop various medical and emotional problems, and they wind up in emergency rooms, which is extremely expensive, and other sorts of savings that the city could achieve by avoiding the disruptive displacements because these families and individuals are represented by council. Now, I want to caution that that doesn't mean that none of those people would be evicted. Some of them will be evicted because of the fact that the circumstances are such that they can't afford the apartment under any circumstances. But even in those situations, we can often convince landlords to give the tenants a few months' time to move out rather than having to leave in 2 weeks. And we can use that extra time to help them find other housing and get other services that would enable them to move into a new apartment in a much better position than they were at the time the landlord sought to evict them. So there are a variety of remedies that lawyers for tenants can achieve when the tenant is represented, almost none of which are available to a tenant who goes into the court by himself or herself and tries to defend themselves against a landlord with a well-trained attorney representing the landlord. Long answer, but that's probably our biggest achievement in the last year, but we work in a lot of other areas. We have created, with the cooperation and help of the courts, city council, and others, we've created help centers in landlord-tenant court, in family court, and in City Hall's Elder Justice Help Center in City Hall, all of which are ways that lawyers can help people who can't afford lawyers to get a better result when they become entangled in one or more parts of the court system.
That statistic about what it could be spent versus saved is very impressive, and it's such a different number from each other that you definitely can tell it would make a difference.
Absolutely, and our hope would be that the city could take those saved funds and reinvest them in things like the school system, better public housing, more social services, and things like that can make a big difference in the quality of life for people in a major center where there is a significant amount of poverty.
So we're going to circle back to the Delivery of Legal Services Committee in a bit, but in the meantime, you've been involved with pro bono for a long time now. What's changed the most at law firms and law firm pro bono programs? And looking back, what lessons have you learned?
Well, that could be a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short. For one thing, pro bono has grown exponentially since I first began doing pro bono work back in 1989 at my first law firm. It was a sort of small, boutique-ish kind of thing at big firms back then. Now, almost every big firm and many mid-sized firms and a lot of solos and small firms do pro bono work. I think there's been a change in the level of recognition that, in fact, providing free legal services is really part of what lawyers must do to be able to be true professionals. As professionals, we need to make access to the legal system and the courts available to as many people as possible, because that's what gives integrity to our legal system in the first place. If a large portion of the population can't access the courts, then our legal system is lacking in certain ways in integrity. So I feel it's our professional duty as lawyers to do whatever we can, and to have our law firms and organizations do whatever they can to increase the access to justice as much as possible to those who can't afford counsel. So I think there's been, over the time since I first started doing pro bono part-time at my first firm until today, there's been a dramatic increase in the recognition of this as a fundamental part of what every lawyer should do. What has also changed is that law schools now have very extensive clinical programs where law students can, in addition to learning all that they need to learn in a traditional law school curriculum, can also get out there, get into the community, and practice what they're learning, the theoretical knowledge that they're developing in the field on behalf of people in need. So that's a huge additional thing. And then I think the courts are also more aware now than they may have been 20-something years ago about how the lack of representation skews the results of encounters in the courtrooms. The reality is that people who are not trained as lawyers, even people who people who either have a sixth grade education or a high school education or even a college education but have no idea what the legal system is all about, really can't access the system in an effective way. And I think that's the primary recognition that has driven the courts to become more aware and to try to balance the proceedings in their courtrooms, what the law schools are doing in terms of expanding their clinical programming, and what the law firms are doing, because we have the resources in most firms to do this, and frankly because the firms benefit themselves by having their younger lawyers, their newer lawyers, learn how to practice law in part by doing pro bono work that is carefully supervised by partners in the firms so that they are learning how to practice law both in their fee work and in their pro bono work. So that's what's changed over the last 20 years.
So since 1989, like you said, you've been involved in this pro bono position. Could you share any tricks of the trade or tips for those new to the position?
Well, there's no one path to get there. I did a lot of different things at my first firm, and then that ended up in a arrangement where the firm agreed to allow me to spend a third of my time managing the pro bono program there. I basically went to the leaders of my first firm and said, look, we do a fair amount of pro bono already. It's been good for the firm. It's been good for our lawyers. And it's, of course, been good for our clients. But we could do even more if we had a management system in place that ensured that we're being as efficient and effective as we can in all the different ways we do pro bono. And so the firm agreed, and I began to work at my first firm. 1/3 of my time was running the pro bono program. I still continued with the other 2/3 of my time to be a commercial litigator, working on cases with large corporate defendants. But I got to spend 1/3 of my time managing pro bono at that firm and continuing to do pro bono myself, and I did a fairly significant amount of that. And then I got lucky because Pepper Hamilton, the firm where I am today, created a full-time position doing the management of pro bono process that I had been doing part-time at my first firm. So I've been doing this here at Pepper Hamilton for almost 15 years. And let me tell you, it's complicated. It requires careful attention. It requires, I think, well-honed interpersonal skills. And I don't mean to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but the reality is that you have to be able to work with all different kinds of people. And that means all different kinds of clients and all different kinds of lawyers who themselves have had very different career paths and have become very good at what they do. And I have to try to interact with them and recruit them to do pro bono for all the right reasons. And they often do, they usually do. But that takes a lot of work, and I need to be sort of alert at all times to whatever I'm hearing from a lawyer that I'm talking to about whether it appeals to him or her or not, and if it doesn't, why not, and if they have an interest only in a narrow area of law, seeing if there are pro bono opportunities in that area. It requires just a lot of flexibility, mental flexibility, and being nimble. So those are the skills, believe it or not, that I try to bring to my job every day. And of course, I'm constantly trying to learn as much as I can about all the substantive areas of law. And I have a pro bono committee, which is essential in the firm. It's partners, all partners from different offices. All of our offices are represented on the committee, but they're one of my panel of experts. I like to think that I'm good at what I do because I have several panels of experts that I can consult. One of them is our law firm's pro bono committee. Another is the public interest community that I deal with day in and day out as a co-chair of the Delivery of Legal Services Committee. And another is, frankly, the Philadelphia Bar Association, where I have access to a wide range of programs and perspectives that help me to keep keep me on my toes in terms of new developments in the law, emerging needs, all those kinds of things. So you have to be able to, keep irons in a lot of different fires, keep an eye on them, and make sure you take advantage of them when you need to. So those are some of the things that I have learned to do over the years in this job. It's, as I say to people when asked, one of the things I love about being a lawyer is that every day is a new day. And by that I mean every case is different, the facts are different, the clients are different. The law is constantly changing because not only is new statutory law being enacted, but judge-made law changes all the time. And then finally, the needs of the clients vary greatly. So, and you learn new techniques as you go along. So every day is a new day for lawyers, and I mean that in the best sense of that phrase, because we're always learning. And I can't think of a better job than one in which you're learning on the job every day.
So I want to circle back to something you said a couple questions ago about kind of how lawyers are the ones that know the legal system. So you wrote in an article for The Verdict that a pro bono requirement is a tax imposed in exchange for a privilege. Could you expand on the idea of mandatory pro bono in your view?
Yeah. I wrote that article in response to an article written by a law professor who basically said that pro bono is an imposition on lawyers. It shouldn't be required. And if it is required, it should only have to be done by lawyers who are new to the profession, and it should not be mandatory. And I wrote back to say, while I agree, and my law firm agrees that it should not be mandatory in the literal sense of the term, the reasons for doing pro bono are so important and so fundamental that we all should do it. And in that sense, it's mandatory. It's mandatory as a should, not as a must. We should do pro bono for the reasons that I probably have touched on already, the most important of which is maintaining the integrity of our profession and giving the greatest level of access to those who can't afford lawyers as possible. So for those reasons, it's something we all should do. So in my firm, for example, we don't make it literally mandatory. However, we strongly encourage it. Our lawyers get, and as in many other firms, get full billable hour credit for the time they put in on pro bono cases. The quality of their work is monitored carefully through their supervising partners and in periodic reviews by our associates committee. The same lawyers who review the quality of a young associate's fee work also look at their pro bono work and take that into account along with their fee work in evaluating their prospects for getting more responsible jobs within the firm and possibly becoming partner. So firms are always monitoring the performance of their lawyers. And in addition to doing pro bono because it's the right thing to do, people need the help, and it's part of our professional obligation as lawyers to help others. It's good for the firms because the lawyers learn by doing. They develop their practice skills in pro bono. And at the end of the day, it helps each individual lawyer advance up the so-called ladder towards partnership and success as a leader in the legal profession. So what I was trying to say by that is, when I said it was a tax on the profession, I was comparing, the other part of that quotation is that lawyers have special privileges. We have access to the courts. We can issue subpoenas. We can require people to come into court. We can examine them and cross-examine them and require that they testify under oath. Those are special privileges we have as lawyers. So if we have those special privileges and powers, the corresponding obligation is to turn it around and give it back by expanding access to the legal system for those who can't afford lawyers. So I didn't mean it as a literal tax. I meant it is sort of a compelling duty that we have, we get, which we're obliged to fulfill in exchange for the privileges we have as lawyers.
I thought that was a great point. I think you also kind of said that lawyers have a monopoly on practicing law because they're the only ones who do it, so they should be able to kind of offer these services. And I just thought that was an excellent point.
Yeah, I firmly believe that. I really do. I guess I would add one more thing. Some lawyers come to law firms thinking there's no way they will have time to do pro bono, and experience pretty much everywhere has shown that not to be the case. What I try to do at this firm, and I know many of my counterparts at other firms try to do this, is to get young lawyers engaged in some kind of pro bono within their first year at the firm. Because once you learn how to do, first of all, because it's a great way to help people and it's a great way to learn how to practice, but once you start doing pro bono as part of your regular practice, you always have some time for it. It's just one of the things you do, like doing all the work that your fee clients expect you to do. It just becomes part of your day-to-day practice. So it's just not true that you have to turn down fee work to do pro bono. In fact, people do them all the time, side by side. I remember years ago, the managing partner of a big firm out in Los Angeles told me that they actually studied that issue because they were constantly saying, well, aren't we losing money charging fee clients if we do pro bono? So he hired one of the big four accounting firms to do a whole study on that. And it turned out that that was not the case, that the highest billing associates in the firm were also the ones doing the most pro bono. And it's a pretty remarkable thing, but it's true, because they were motivated as associates to get into their profession and get into the mix and do everything they could, both for their fee clients and for clients who need help through pro bono.
It's amazing. So I want to talk about, again, the DLSC. So you serve as the co-chair of Philadelphia Bar Association's Delivery of Legal Services Committee, including its Civil Gideon and Access to Justice Task Force.
Actually, they're two separate entities. I'm the co-chair of both. But the Access to Justice Task Force looks at bigger picture things that go beyond just the public interest legal community. We try to work cooperatively with government leaders, with city council, with the judges. The task force has a number of judges who are members. And we are all trying to work collaboratively to expand access to justice in the community. In contrast, while the Delivery of Legal Services Committee has a similar goal, they are focused more on how our public interest law centers and the law firms that are pro bono partners can do more for the clients they serve. What additional kinds of programs can we provide to serve elderly victims of abuse, or children who are victims of abuse and neglect, or the homeless, or people who are facing mortgage foreclosure wrongfully or eviction wrongfully? What more can our agencies with pro bono help do to help these clients? Whereas the task force, they sort of have that overlapping mission, but the DLSC committee focuses primarily on our legal services agencies and cooperating pro bono lawyers, whereas the task force tends to look at the bigger picture. What can our work with other power centers, that some of which are not lawyers, like city council and the mayor's office, how can we work with those kinds of entities that have a lot of power on their own to cooperatively expand access to justice in the larger community?
So I want to focus on Civil Gideon because some of our listeners might not know what that is. Could you explain that?
Yes, I can try. Essentially, the phrase comes in part from a famous United States Supreme Court decision called Gideon versus Wainwright, in which the U.S. Supreme Court found that criminal defendants, not civil, but criminal defendants who can't afford a lawyer have a right to one. And that decision was founded on the Sixth Amendment right for people who are charged with wrongdoing to confront their accusers and to present evidence on their own behalf, all of that sort of thing. That is what the Supreme Court said in Gideon versus Wainwright makes it essential that any criminal defendant who is charged and can't afford a lawyer has a right to an appointed lawyer. So we borrowed that phrase, Gideon, from that case, and we took it to the civil side of the ledger, if you will, to civil matters, not criminal matters, but to those kinds of civil matters that affect human beings very fundamentally. And they include housing, which would include mortgage foreclosure and landlord-tenant law, health care, the right to go to an emergency room and get health, even if you don't, health care services, even if you don't have medical insurance, and access to children issues, because that's a big area of controversy and many different kinds of overlapping laws and situations. So civil litigation refers to the concept that there should be a right to counsel if you can't afford a lawyer in areas of fundamental legal need, as in housing, healthcare, and access to children, access to your family. So we're not calling for a right to counsel in all civil matters, but only those within the wide range of civil matters where fundamental human needs are at stake. You know, the thought that you could lose your apartment even though you've done nothing wrong because a landlord is making an unsupported argument that you violated the terms of the lease. And this is just an example, or that you have a mortgage that is now too high for the monthly payments are too high now because you lost your job in the recession. You have another job, but your income is not as much. Does that mean that you have to have your mortgage foreclosed upon and you have to move out to either become homeless or find an apartment somewhere? Or with legal assistance, and by the way, with financial expert assistance, can you renegotiate your mortgage and find a way to stay in your home? But housing is an area of fundamental need, whether it's a house or an apartment. Healthcare is a fundamental need, and if you don't have enough insurance to get a certain procedure done, but it's a life-threatening condition that you're trying to contend with, you should be able to get that kind of fundamental medical care in an emergency room or otherwise that you need. It's your life can be at stake. That's a fundamental human need. And then finally, there's very few things in life, I think, that are more important than the sanctity of a family. And mothers and fathers should never lose access to their children for reasons that, unless there are compelling reasons, such that after a procedure in which all the parties are represented, father, mother, children, so a process has been completed in which they've all been heard, all their evidence has been put in, and it's been supervised and evaluated by social services agencies and ultimately a family court judge. You should never lose access to your children until all of that happens, and only in those cases where that is the only remaining alternative to protect the rights of children. But as you can tell from that rapid fire outline that I just gave you, family law is a very, very complicated area, and people really can't handle it without a lawyer, and without a lawyer who's been trained in areas of family law and knows how the process works and ensures that their client, whether it's the father, the mother, the abused child, or whoever, has a lawyer who represents them. So those are the areas of fundamental human need where we believe that there should be a right to or access to counsel. Some people call it a right to counsel. Some people call it universal access to counsel. I'm not so caught up on the terminology as the concept, which is that disadvantaged people of all shapes and sizes who cannot hire a lawyer but are facing a fundamental change in their living situation should not have to experience that without the opportunity to have a lawyer stand up for them in a court of law or elsewhere to protect their rights.
Yeah, I think there's a statistic out there that says if you are represented, it definitely increases your chances of success in your cases. I know that's definitely in landlord-tenant. That's very...
Yes. The statistic in Philadelphia on that is that if a tenant represents himself in all the cases that were studied by the Stout Group over a period of several years in Philadelphia, only 7% of tenants who represented themselves were able to remain in their homes. But all but 7% experienced what we are calling a disruptive displacement, which includes direct eviction or a de facto eviction through other means. Whereas more than 80%, depending on the survey, more than 80%, and in some surveys 90% of tenants who have representation are able to remain in their homes, in their apartments. So the situation is dramatically different when you have a lawyer and when you don't.
Exactly. So if you had a magic wand, what is one thing you would change about law firm pro bono or access to justice? That might be it. It might be way more. I know it's a daunting question.
Well, if I had a magic wand, I could probably come up with 25 or 30 things that I would want to have done, because it's a complicated system. We operate in a larger society that has a whole bunch of different motivations. We all want to live well. We all want to have good jobs. We all want to have decent homes. We all want to have health care. And I think the viewpoint that I've approached, that I've taken in this issue is, well, we may not be able to achieve perfection. In fact, we almost certainly won't be able to achieve perfection. We want to create the greatest possible opportunity for people to achieve justice regardless of their financial income or their financial well-being, regardless of their educational level, regardless of whether they live in cities or in rural areas. Regardless of all of those demographics, all of them should be able to get the best outcome in our legal system possible. And we have, in the United States, in my opinion, the best legal system in the world, because we have found ways to allocate authority to 3 branches of government. We've found ways to have courts where people have a right to be heard and to give evidence and to defend themselves. And we even have an appellate system so that in those cases where a trial court may not have conducted the trial properly, there's a right of appeal. And we have 2 levels of appeal at a minimum for most matters that go through a court system. So we have so many institutional benefits and opportunities for people to achieve the right outcome, one that's fair and just for everybody. So if I had a magic wand, I would want there to be more money for courts, more money for legal services attorneys, more money for the educational system so that people who fall into hard times did not fall into hard times because they didn't get a good education. I would want more money for social services to assist families who are going through difficulties, to try to preserve the integrity of the birth family, and so that most children grow up in a 2-parent household, whereas now we have many people who don't because of the intense impact of poverty and inability to get jobs. So I would want all boats to rise. More money for the court system, more money for public interest lawyers. They should be paid a lot more than they're paid in the current system. Right now they're paid a fraction of what lawyers in private firms make, but they do it because they believe deeply in the mission that they're performing, and they do a spectacular job at it. So, more resources for those things, but I'd also want more recognition in the larger community that how important this all is. We all, in our hearts, want good things to happen to other people. And I think often of how when there is a natural disaster like the fires in California or the flooding that's taken place all over the country, when disaster strikes, people come out of their houses and their homes and their jobs, and everybody jumps to help. That's because it's human nature. We want to help people. And we don't say we're only going to help Democrats, or we're only going to help Republicans, or we're only going to help liberals, or we're only going to help conservatives. We don't do that. We help everybody because it's our natural instinct, and we should be creating an environment in this country that helps us recognize more or readily and more easily that our best motives are our best motives, and that we should listen to them and pay attention to them. We're all better off when there's more justice. If the schools are better, even if we're not sending our children to those schools, if the inner city schools get better, they're going to produce more productive citizens, happier people, people with jobs, and there's going to be a dramatic drop in the number of people who go to jail, because very often jail is sort of a place of last resort when we've sort of not been able to help people in all different other ways, such as through better education, better housing, better nutrition, better health care. If we can get those things for everybody, the legal system will have a lot less to do, and there'll be more justice.
New and archive episodes of the podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Please take a moment to leave an Apple Podcast review. is quick and easy to do. We'd appreciate the feedback and would help make it easier for other listeners to find the show and expand the conversation about pro bono and access to justice. We'd love to hear from you. Send your comments, feedback, and questions to probono@probonoinst.org.